religious enterprise? It's like, no, I'm afraid not. That's not a very differentiated analysis, but I get your point at least. And then the other thing Harris wanted to do is he wanted, partly because he was so upset about the moral relativism that threatens us, let's say, and that he believed was responsible for such things as the Auschwitz nightmares, that he wanted to ground an ethic in objective fact, because the only thing he believes is real is objective fact. And so that's his motivation. Now, that's problematic as far as I'm concerned because of some of the issues we already raised, which is, well, which objective facts? There's like an infinite number of them. And that's actually a fatal error. That's a fatal problem with your supposition. Now, it's complicated, right? Because you say, well, the wages of sin are death. You can take an ecological and evolutionary view of that. It's like, obviously, whatever ethic we use to organize our behavior and our societies has to serve the functions of, let's say, reproductive fitness. So there's got to be a concordance between the domain of ethics and the domain of evolutionary biology, let's say. And then it's an open question to what degree you can use the findings of evolutionary biology to buttress your ethical claims. So here's an example. I talked to Frans de Waal 2 weeks ago, and that'll be out soon. And he's the world's greatest living primatologist, perhaps. His only competitor would be, what's his name? He wrote Catching Fire, Richard Wrangham, who I also talked to about a week ago. And de Waal's work is unbelievably important. It's unbelievably important because he's concentrated on the idea of the alpha male. And, you know, we have in popular parlance, we have an idea of the alpha chimp, right? Or the alpha male, for that matter. And it's pretty much a postmodern neo-Marxist view of primate sociology. And that is that the biggest, ugliest, meanest male dominates by brute force. And so now he's at the top of the pyramid. And so the implicit claim there from the biologists is that power, those who express power most effectively, power being the ability to compel, those who express power most effectively will dominate the pyramid of dominance, of social hierarchy, and they'll prevail reproductively. Well, that's pretty gloomy, that idea, you know, but people think, well, that's how you look at the world if you're sensible. It's like, well, Frans de Waal's been studying chimps for 30 years, and that's not true. That is not what happens. He told me flat out that frequently a small male can become alpha, especially if he has the support of an influential female. And the small male becomes alpha and has the support of the influential female, not because he expresses arbitrary power, but because he's unbelievably good at mutual reciprocation. And so he has friends, and he does things for his friends, and they do things for him, and they trust each other, and he has lots of friends, which also means he has no enemies, which turns out to be really important because the brute chimps, like the psychopath alphas, they do rule now and then, but they get torn to shreds by their enemies because, you know, they're tough, let's say, and mean, but they have an off day, and two chimps they stomped a week before ally together and tear them, literally tear them into shreds. And so the psychopath chimp types who use power to attain dominance have very short rules and end in a very bloody way. And so de Waal has pointed out, like Piaget did among children, that power is an unstable ethic upon which to base a social hierarchy, even for chimps. And chimps are male-dominated, they have a patriarchal society, and they're relatively brutal. And it doesn't even work for them. It certainly doesn't work for human beings. So whatever is at the apex of the pyramid, it's not, as the bloody Marxists insist, you know, the raw expression of power and exploitation. Wrong. Wrong. Not the case. Doesn't even work in nature. Doesn't work for rats. Doesn't work for chimpanzees. Certainly doesn't work for people. And then there is a kind of natural ethic that emerges out of that, right? Because with rats and with chimps and other social animals, it varies to some degree from species to species. There's the necessity for something like mutual reciprocity as the basis for successful social organization. And that's something like treat your neighbor like you would want to be treated. It's something like that. It's the behavioral equivalent of that. And you asked earlier, you know, from whence does the highest injunction emerge, or
what comes down?
Well, so it's strange, right? Because some of it's bottom up. It's like, even among animals, mutual reciprocity seems to be a cardinal organizing feature, even done in the spirit of play, interestingly enough, because play is a mammalian universal. And that's kind of bottom up. But then at the same time, and this I suppose pertains to the mysterious role of consciousness in the world. It's like, well, we're also aware of this, right? And we also think about it abstractly as a good, and we don't only learn it bottom up, we also conceptualize it top down, and then they meet. And that's Moses coming down the mountain with the tablets. And so what did he meet on the mountain? Well, God. Well, he met whatever's at the highest place. And we all are stuck with the problem of determining what we are going to put in the highest place. And increasingly, I've been viewing the biblical corpus as an attempt to cast narrative light on the nature of the spirit that should be at the highest place. So I can give you an example of that. So in the earliest stages of Genesis, God is, so what should be in the highest place? Remember, that's ineffable and unutterable in some sense, and also incomprehensible. That's technically insisted upon by the religious types. But whatever it is it's that which encounters chaotic potential and then uses truthful language rooted in love to extract habitable order. That's what should be in the highest place, and then that's the spirit in which men and women, after which men and women are fashioned. And you might say, well, I don't believe that. It's like, well, I don't know what you mean when you say that. Because, like, do you believe that people have intrinsic worth? And you might say, no. It's like, well, is that how you treat the people around you? Because if you don't treat them like they have intrinsic worth, if they have any sense, they're going to get the hell away from you real fast, right? Because that's the one thing that everyone wants, is they want the relationship they have with another person to be predicated on mutual recognition of intrinsic worth. And that's very much tied in with the idea of the logos that inhabits us all. It's certainly tied in with the idea of self-evidence in the Declaration of Independence, the American Declaration of Independence. You know, we hold these truths as self-evident. Well, what do you mean self-evident? Exactly. Well, part of it is, people are fashioned in the image of God. Well, I don't believe that. Well, who says you don't believe that? And maybe you don't, but that's not so good for you, and it's certainly not so good for the people you're interacting with, even if that person happens to be you. Because, like, what's the alternative? People have no intrinsic worth. Then you're in Dostoevskian territory. It's like his book, Crime and Punishment. Because